Hey guys, welcome in. We are live tonight on a special Wednesday night edition of doing this show for the CFF site. My name is Joe DeSalvo, the voice of the college fantasy football site. Welcome on in. Give you guys a few minutes to join on in and sort of set the top of the show off by running down the agenda coming up for the night, coming up for the weeks ahead. We are winding down now. We are in week 9. College fantasy football playoffs right around the corner. You can tell the sense of urgency has definitely stepped up. A lot of emails coming in saying, Joe, listen, I'm on the brink of elimination. I'm sitting pretty trying to go for that bye. Hey, I'm working on for next year. What are some keepers coming up? So I'm going to address and run down a few things that we have coming up here. First of all, for tonight, we're going to do the regular routine, right? I'm going to kind of do this little intro, open it up. We're going to jump right into the player rankings, spend a few minutes at each position, quarterback, running back, and receiver. And then we're going to jump into the start bench this week. A little different this week. I think what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to start condensing the start bench into this show here, and then that way it'll bring more viewers into the show for the start to see that start bench piece. And I'm going to end that with some questions that you guys have here in the chat room, questions that I have gotten via email over the last 30-40 minutes or so, maybe over the last hour. I'll check over the course of the show to see if we get any new ones, so I'll address the questions. And you might be asking why a special edition of a Wednesday night live show when you've been doing them on Thursday all year? Well, what I can tell you guys is that a member, a buddy of mine here, a CFF site member, one of our in-house league participants, friend of mine for a number of years, a good friend of mine, getting married this week. I'm standing in a wedding, everything going down tomorrow night and Thursday night. So Zeke, congratulations, buddy. This show's for you. But we're condensing everything in here on Wednesday evening to give it all to you, try to get all the content. So here's the one thing that I'll warn you now that we're doing the show on a Wednesday night as opposed to a Thursday evening. Pay attention to some of the injury reports. As you see in some of the rankings that are posted now, we did not include some guys like Bryce Love that are questionable. What's become a tradition now every week is that we've kind of stayed away from ranking guys that seem questionable, that are into that game day decision mode. The only time, and I warned you guys about this last week, and I'll mention it again this week, the only time that I really like to kind of consider guys that are game day decisions is guys coming off a concussion, because it's not a physical ailment. It's more of an up top mental aspect, but when they're cleared, their body's at full health. I always worry about the guys that are hurt heading into the weekend, particularly if we haven't gotten a report by Thursday evening that the guy's cleared, ready to go. So pay attention to that. We are here on Wednesday. We're going to mention some injuries, something we need to monitor over the next 48, 72 hours. But hopefully we'll be able to get some guys updated for you all as we get a little bit closer to the kickoff. So that runs down what we're going to go ahead and do tonight. What we have for the weeks to come, I can tell you, like I've mentioned last week, once when we get around this time, week 9, week 10, 11, 12, once when the college fantasy football playoffs rev up, we lose some of you guys over here, some of the traffic. There's a lot of you guys that stay with us all year long, stay with us through the bowl season, and then every once in a while we'll put some stuff up in the off season and then really hit it strong again in the spring and kick it off with the preseason fantasy guide. There's some of you guys that stay with us all the time. There's some of you guys that we lose in week 9, week 10, week 11, week 12 as you get eliminated from the playoffs. Couple of things I'll ask you to consider as I did last week. Go over to FanPicks, the link on our site. Get involved with some DFS play. Earn yourself some real money. We're also going to do the College Fantasy Bowl Guide again this year for all you guys that get into and play and create college bowl leagues. You can do that over at Fantrax as well. You've got to get into that. Get some buddies together that are in your league. Get 5, 6, 8 of you. Have a redraft with every single team in the bowl. It makes all the small bowls worth watching. It makes every game interesting. I challenge you to do that. So we will get the bowl season fantasy guide again. And guys, look, here's the thing, and here's the big announcement for this week. Because we have lost some of you guys over the course of the season as your fantasy teams get eliminated, the one announcement that I will make tonight moving forward is the exclusive email, the extended rankings that we have been providing to our exclusive email subscribers. That email will stay exclusive, but I will post my weekly notes, weekly observations that I usually send out to you guys on a Sunday night or a Monday morning. I will now start posting those on the website starting in week 10 for everyone to see, to try to keep you guys hooked into coming back every week. And for all of you guys that are in the playoffs, I think you guys, all the feedback that we're getting on the extended rankings and the email has been just a home run, guys. Hopefully we've taken you guys, most of you all, to the promised land. And now the extended rankings will be posted up on the website as we get into week 10 and into the playoffs for everybody to see. But I want to thank you guys that have really hopped on board with that exclusive email. Still tons of emails coming in every week. I just had a bunch today. I printed 3 emails out just within the last 30, 40 minutes and told you guys that I would address them on the show. With moving everything up to Wednesday, we're condensing everything in. So that kind of gives you a preview of the content that we have tonight, the content that we have for the weeks to come, and also the big announcement that starting in week 10, I will post my weekly observations that I send out to the exclusive email and the extended rankings onto the website starting in week 10 for everyone to get access to. And that is really just a preview of what you guys are going to get when you get that again in 2018. So with that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and jump right into the quarterback rankings. Thank you guys for coming in tonight. Be sure to post your questions in the chat room. I'll get to them. Hold off as late as you possibly can. Maybe I'll touch on some player rankings, in the player rankings, some of your questions as we go. So I'll ask you guys that are kind of coming in to hold off on some of those questions to the end. So with that being said, let's get into it, guys. We're 6 minutes into the show already, and I haven't gotten to the rankings yet. Here we go. Quarterback rankings, week 9. I posted them up on the website just a little earlier today, so a lot of you guys have not had a lot of time to digest them. The extended rankings went out just an hour or 2 ago as well. A lot here to digest, and I'll try to go through them with you over the next 45, 50 minutes. So no surprise at the top, Lamar Jackson regaining that top spot. Baker Mayfield, number 2. And look at number 3, Drew Lock. We put Drew Lock in the top 5 last week. I mentioned to you guys a lot of what goes into these rankings is consistency, confidence, and productivity, especially even little momentum is figured into the rankings. And you know what? That was breaking the norm by putting Drew Lock into our top 3 last week, but I felt so strongly about that matchup that we put him in the top 3. And sure enough, 5 touchdowns, over 350 yards passing last week. Once again, another great matchup at Connecticut. Drew Lock, a top 3 pick. Will Grier, Mason Rudolph going head-to-head this week in a number 4 and 5 guys. I think you have to like the potential for points scored in that game. And there's another game under the radar for you full FBS guys. You look at West Virginia, you look at the Oklahoma State game. That Arkansas State at New Mexico State game has a lot of fantasy potential for you guys playing in full FBS modes between Tyler Rogers, Justice Hansen, Jaleel Scott. And then we get word this week that Larry Rose bumped up to probable. So for all of you guys that actually have been playing with Jason Huntley for a while, probably bummed out news for you guys. But for those of you all that have Larry Rose, what a week to come back and what a matchup that should be in a high-scoring game at New Mexico State this week. Quentin Flowers, putting him in the top 10 this week. I have a feeling we're going to see a little bit more from Quentin Flowers this week in the running game against a Houston defense that's been struggling a little bit. I look for Quentin Flowers to have a big game this week. Certainly not even close to the preseason 2 ranking that we gave him in the beginning of the year. But you know what? South Florida's been winning. And between Flowers, between Tice and Dearness Johnson, that 3-headed rushing attack has been highly productive. I look for Flowers to have a big game this week at home against Houston. And you know what, guys? Here's Malik Rozier, quarterback Miami, playing at home. Playing on the road at North Carolina. That North Carolina defense is struggling. Malik Rozier, I tell you, I watched him last week. Amon Richards dropped about 4 or 5 balls. He probably could have had another 100, 150 yards passing. I'll tell you, I really watched Rozier last week closely. Super cool, delivers a nice ball. I'm telling you, he's been an under-the-radar fantasy player all season long, and I think he has a big week this week, another 25, 30-point week, and that's been fairly consistent for him all season long. So I think because of that consistency, he's a top 10 play this week. And look at number 10, Brandon Wimbush. Man, I went all in on Brandon Wimbush at the beginning of the year, and I'll tell you, every week that we looked at the schedule, all you could say was, is this the week? Look, the matchup's not great. Matchup's not great. USC last week. Man, that Notre Dame offense, that ground attack they have, guys, is just unstoppable right now. It all starts up front, and Josh Adams and Brandon Wimbush are must-plays. Wimbush missed the game against North Carolina, right? But Wimbush has been solid week after week after week, even if he hasn't done it in the air. He's been giving it to you on the ground. So for those of you guys that jumped on Brandon Wimbush at the beginning of the year, you have to be really, really appreciative of what he's been able to give you from a fantasy standpoint. And there he is at number 10 against a good North Carolina State defense. That's a good North Carolina State defense coming into South Bend this week. But I do like Notre Dame's offense to put up points this week. And I like Wimbush. I think his consistency, the confidence level, it's all there for a Notre Dame team that looks like a well-oiled machine right now on offense. And I like the Irish at home to put up a lot of points. I mentioned Tyler Rogers at 12. I touched on him already. Number 15, Nick Shimonek, has been a little bit of a disappointment. He has struggled. For those of you that I sent in the email this week, go look at his stats over the last few weeks. What a disappointment he's been over the last couple of weeks. I think he has a bounce-back game this week on the road at Oklahoma against a defense that's really been struggling and giving up a lot of points. Between Iowa State game, between Kansas State last week, you have to like the potential for Nick Shimonek this week, Texas Tech playing at Oklahoma. And look at number 17, Alex Delton, the quarterback of Kansas State. Look what he did last week. But I think in addition to what he did last week, you also have to take into account the matchup he has this week against Kansas. They are on the road. That might be a good thing. Maybe Kansas can put up a few points on the board and make Delton really, I mean, look, I think he had 27 carries last week. Guys, he gets 20-plus carries this week. You're looking at 100 yards and a couple of touchdowns from Alex Delton, and I crushed him a couple of weeks ago for his passing skills, and he even was efficient last week in the passing game, and I think that makes Alex Delton a top 20 pick. Two guys that I like right next to one another in the rankings this week, Mason Fine and Ben Hicks. You know, a lot of questions coming in. I'll touch on this in the receivers on Jalen Guyton, so stay tuned for that. I'll touch on him when we get to the receivers. He was blanked this past week playing against a Florida Atlantic team, and Ben Hicks, you know what, when you look at the receiver rankings, and I'll fast forward between what Trey Quinn and now Cortland Sutton are actually doing together, I think you really have to like the prospects of Ben Hicks. And you know what, you have to really, it's interesting because we've been banging on the Tulsa run defense all season long. So this could be a really good week for Xavier Jones and Kimon Freeman, the running backs for SMU. But SMU's been so efficient and so effective in the passing game. I can't see that abandoning that. And hopefully Tulsa scores some points this week, and that becomes a shootout for you. That could be a really, really big fantasy game for some of you owners out there. So Ben Hicks, Mason Fine at number 18 and 19. And Logan Woodside, number 21, big week last week. He's had some big weeks. Been a little Jekyll and Hyde for Logan Woodside this week, but that offense against Ball State should put up a lot of points. I like everyone involved in this game. I like Woodside. I like the running back. I like the running backs. I like the receivers in this game. A lot, between Swanson and John Bay Johnson. Deontay Johnson really has cooled off since the beginning of the year, and I don't know if that had to do with the loss of Cody Thompson or whatnot, but hopefully he can get a rebound week this week as well. But I really like the Toledo offense moving forward. And number 22, Taylor Lamb, Appalachian State quarterback, playing at Massachusetts. You know, Taylor Lamb isn't going to exactly tear it up, but I love the matchup this week, playing on the road against a bad Massachusetts defense. Appalachian State has not been able to get the run game established like they have in years past. They are depleted at running back. Jalen Moore going into this evening still questionable. So they're going to rely a lot on the passing game that's starting to recently emerge and be effective. I like Taylor Lamb this week as a nice fantasy play for you FBS leagues, maybe at the quarterback 2 spot. And here's another quarterback that I like this week, definitely in Power 5, and I think he's worth a quarterback 2 start in full FBS leagues. And that's John Wolford, the quarterback, Wake Forest, playing against Louisville. Yes, Louisville was effective defensively against Florida State last week, but remember what Boston College did to him a couple of weeks ago. Louisville defense has been struggling. They pulled it together last week at Florida State, but I still like Wolford at home for Wake Forest to do some damage against Louisville this week. Milton McKenzie, number 26, a lot of questions coming in on him. Before you guys start sending questions on Milton, because I've gotten Milton McKenzie, I got a lot of questions on him this week. Here's the things you have to consider. Milton McKenzie had a little hamstring tug last week, so you have to be a little questionable for him going into this week. They say he's going to be fine. They say he's going to play. Central Florida's got things rolling right now. That defense is really playing well. As a matter of fact, the Central Florida defense for us is ranked number 1 this week. So when you look at those two things, McKenzie Milton being banged up, Central Florida defense playing solid, they play Austin Peay this week, guys. It's not even, I know they're staying in the run to be the undefeated group of 5 team. I don't think they'll have a lot of problems this week. I think they lean on the running game a little bit more, maybe with Adrian Killens. I think McKenzie does enough in the passing game early that they race out to a lead, maybe give him a rest. The defense keeps Austin Peay's offense in check. So that's why McKenzie, for me, is ranked outside of the top 25. There is a little risk involved just because of the opponent and because of that hamstring pull. They need him healthy down the home stretch. And then we're going to go all the way down to number 35, guys. Jordan Ta'amu, quarterback, Ole Miss, taking over for an injured Shea Patterson. I have to tell you, for those emails that were coming in about Jordan Ta'amu, I like him. He was a nice waiver wire addition, and here's why. I thought he looked really good in the game that he played last week against LSU. It didn't look like the game was too big for him. So he looked really smooth back there in the game. I think he's going to give you some production on the ground, and most importantly, and this is all about college fantasy football. It's all about matchups, right? That schedule looks really good for Ole Miss. He gets a matchup against Arkansas this week, gets a game underneath his belt. For you guys that have him on your roster heading into the playoffs, there's a matchup coming up in a couple of weeks against UL Lafayette. So I think he'll be a nice spot start for you here down the stretch and into the playoffs if you get that far into your league. And number 38, Mike White. A little bit of surprise. White coming off of, I think, back-to-back games in which he's had 5 touchdowns. Before those games, White struggled. I don't think he had a 20-point fantasy game all year until his last 2 games. Well, you know what? It looks like on paper, from what Western Kentucky has done recently, that matchup against Florida Atlantic could produce a lot of points. I'm a little concerned. That Florida Atlantic team has really, Lane Kiffin has done a great job with that team. They've really pulled it together. That defense is playing well, and the offense is playing very efficient. I'm a little bit more concerned we're going to see Mike White from the first 6 weeks of the season than the one that we've seen over week 7 and 8 against Florida Atlantic, and that's why Mike White is ranked outside of the top 30. Another surprise, Kelly Bryant ranked number 39. Why so low? Remember, look, everybody that saw the game against Syracuse, and I would imagine most of you did see the highlights because that was during a weeknight. I think it was on a Friday night game. It was on ESPN. Kelly Bryant is not the same quarterback without his wheels. Now, he had a concussion, was in concussion protocol, seems to be cleared for that. But my concern is how healed is his ankle? Because he's not the same quarterback and not nearly the same fantasy quarterback if he's playing on a bum ankle. And I have to tell you, he's a guy, I think if you have Kelly Bryant and you're in a good position, a safe position for a playoff spot right now, you have to give him a week off. You have to observe, especially if you're fighting for your playoff life and you're in desperation mode, you may have to roll the dice. But I think anyone else right now, you play it safe. You look at your roster. Hopefully you have some depth and maybe give Bryant a week to see what he does against that Georgia Tech defense. And then number 41, the last quarterback that I'm going to touch on for the night, Josh Rosen, UCLA, playing on the road at Washington. More coming up on Josh Rosen as we get into the start bench, so I won't belabor the point on him at right now. So that kind of takes care of the quarterbacks. I went through the top 41 there. A lot of notes at the quarterbacks at the top, and we're going to jump right into the running backs. Matter of fact, I probably have fewer receivers highlighted this week, but I do have a number of running backs highlighted, so bear with me I'm going to go through the process here of the rankings with the running backs, my thought process, my insight, and maybe tell you who I think is a little higher or lower, because there are a couple of guys on that list. And no surprise, Jonathan Taylor, number one, running back, Wisconsin, playing at Illinois. Tremendous matchup this week. So I think Taylor, now I have to tell you this, and this is something that I have to say. Bryce Love was my number one running back going into this week. How could he not be? But, like I mentioned, questionable, supposed to be maybe a game time decision. I'm telling you right now, for you guys that are fighting for your playoff lives, maybe starting playoffs, that's a scary proposition right now to have Bryce Love day to day going into a big fantasy week. If you hopefully most of you guys have already been in a nice position with Love, with what Love has given you this week. Here's why I'm going to be optimistic about Love. Because if he he has every incentive to play right now because he's in the Heisman talk. And that has a lot to do with whether or not a guy's going to suit up and play. That's motivation for him to play this week. So if it's really a game time decision with Bryce Love, given what he has on the line from the Heisman standpoint, I think you have to be a little concerned and play it safe. Like I said, it is only Wednesday evening. We have another 72 hours before we get to that point, or less. You know what? I take that back. They play an early game this week. So a lot of you guys are probably out there saying, Joe, he does play early this week. That probably plays as a disadvantage for Love's owners. So we need to monitor that over the next 24 hours. So I am scared. You do need to make preparations if you have Love. Make preparations to look somewhere else. Jeffrey Wilson, running back, North Texas, playing against Old Dominion this week. I have to tell you, I saw the transcript of the North Tex presser, and it seems like they realized that they're not committed to the run as recently as they probably should. I do look for Wilson to get more touches against a bad Old Dominion defense that was destroyed last week. I think Jeffrey Wilson will be a top 10 play this week. Ito Smith, top 5 running back for us this week. A lot of questions coming in on him last week. It seems like he missed the second half and overtime due to cramps last week. So I don't necessarily think that it's a muscle issue. I don't necessarily think it's an injury. I think you're okay. Everything that I'm seeing on Ito Smith right now is a thumbs up. So I think you put him in the top 10. And then Myles Gaskin, probably as high as we've had Myles Gaskin this year. But Myles Gaskin gets a great matchup this week. Washington coming off of a loss, coming off of a bye week, and now draws a terrible, terrible UCLA run defense. I think that's a good formula for you Myles Gaskin owners. Big week this week in week 9 if you have him. Number 9, Travis Homer, Miami at North Carolina. I love the Miami offense this week at North Carolina. I think Homer has a bigger week this week than he has last week. So I think you get him in your lineup. And look at Josh Adams, number 10. Cracked the top 10 this week. Home matchup against North Carolina State. State with a good defense, but I still like Adams. I still like that rushing offense against a North Carolina State rush defense that I think is okay. They're not that great. I think where Notre Dame would struggle is if they were more of a passing team. So I think you're going to be okay with your Notre Dame guys, Brandon Wimbush and Josh Adams. Number 12, Jordan Chunn, really stung a lot of fantasy owners last week. He suffered a laceration 2 weeks ago. He was bumped up to probable last week and didn't play. And I have to tell you, if you have Chunn this week, you are licking your chops against a Georgia Southern team that just let go of their coach. I think this could be a huge week if you're a Chunn owner. Hopefully that bye week gave him a chance to be healthy. He should play this week, and he should have a big game. Number 15, Lexington Thomas, running back UNLV at Fresno State. Now, I have a couple of points to make in regards to Lexington Thomas. Will he be affected by a possible change at quarterback this week? Maybe. Armani Rogers looks doubtful to play. Concussion, I don't think he's going to play. So if you have Armani Rogers, that's why he's not in the rankings. You could probably move on from him this week. But how will that affect Lexington Thomas? We'll see. The other thing to keep in mind, they're playing at Fresno State. And I don't know if there's a better story from a turnaround perspective right now in the FBS than Fresno State. Compared to what they were last year, you look at them this year, and for those of you guys that don't play full FBS, probably unaware of this, Fresno State's only 2 losses this year have been at Alabama and at Washington. pretty impressive what the Bulldogs have done to turn around that program, and I like their defense this week, and that's why Lexington Thomas is not a top 10 running back this week. Number 16, Shamari Brooks, running back Tulsa, playing SMU, and boy, if you started Brooks last week, what a week that you got, and I have to tell you, tons and tons and tons of D'Angelo Brewer questions coming in, and I guarantee you go into your league, because in our in-house league, we're actually heading into, we've got 4 teams left in each of our double elimination tournaments, and there were, at least I know, in both 2 leagues where D'Angelo Brewer was a start in lineups, and people took zeros across the board. From what I understand, D'Angelo Brewer could have played last week. They held him out, and looks like because of nagging injuries, there may be a similar situation this week. I am concerned if you have D'Angelo Brewer. Right now, I'll be honest with you, I just don't know. And right now, if you just don't know, you have to make plans elsewhere in your lineup if you have D'Angelo Brewer. But that's good for Shamari Brooks owners. Royce Freeman, number 17. I'll tell you what. Go look at Royce Freeman's beginning of the year and go look at his last 3 or 4 games. The differences in touchdowns is absolutely astounding. He's just been a different player over the last 4 games, and that probably has to do with the loss of the quarterback and change at quarterback. So Royce Freeman's still a top 20 pick. I still expect him to get a lot of yards against Utah. What I'm concerned about is Oregon's ability to stick the ball in the end zone, and that's why Royce Freeman is not a top 15 pick. And number 18, Ray Laurie. I have to tell you, I'm one of those fantasy owners that got Laurie off the waiver wire a couple of weeks ago, knowing that he was coming back, and I didn't stick him in the lineup last week, and it burned me. Ray Laurie is back. Another decent matchup this week, playing at North Texas, and I think you have to get him in as a running back too this week. Larry Rose making a return, like I mentioned at the top when I was touching on the quarterbacks. Larry Rose looks like he's coming back. Based on the matchup at home against Arkansas State, if Rose was 100% healthy and he had been playing over the last couple of weeks, I would make a case where Larry Rose was probably a top 15, top 10 running back this week. But I don't think they take Huntley completely out of the game plan. I think Rose comes back in. He gets a majority of the work. But I do think Huntley does steal away a few fantasy points from him. But he's still a top 20 fantasy pick. And Diasame St. Juste, the running back of Hawaii, he's been a yardage machine all season long. The only thing that keeps him out of the top 15 this week is a matchup playing against San Diego State, whose defense has been susceptible this year. But they are solid. And I do think San Diego State does enough to keep Diasame St. Juste from being a top-tier fantasy running back this week. Number 25, late addition to the rankings, Cam Akers. And I have to apologize now to a lot of you guys and thank a lot of you guys for sending an email, sending in things over Twitter. We were rushing to get everything in this week, and so with that, we missed a lot of guys here or there, omitted a few guys. We were making a lot of edits over the course of an hour, so thank you guys for sending that in. Cam Akers was a guy who accidentally got omitted out of the rankings. We had to add him in later, but Cam Akers is a top 25 play this week, guys. They're playing at Boston College. We're going to touch on Cam Akers in the start bench piece, and I'm going to mention why he's a start this week, other than the fact that Jaquez Patrick is out. I think the numbers look good for him this week, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. Alexander Madison, 26, Boise State playing at Utah State. Alexander Madison was my home run hitter last week. He didn't particularly do as well that I thought. I think he fell just shy of 100 yards, added 4 catches, I think, for another 40 yards. So he had some decent points, but it wasn't what I was expecting. Montel Cozart vultured the rushing touchdowns inside the 5-yard line, and I think he scored twice. Number 27, Patrick Laird making a comeback for Cal. Looks healthy now, playing on the road at Colorado. I think that's a good matchup for him. And Adrian Killins, I touched on him in the beginning when I was touching on Mackenzie Milton in the quarterback rankings. I think he could have a nice big week, break out a couple of long runs against Austin Peay. He's a good sleeper running back at your running back 2, 3, or flex position this week. Number 36, Karan Higdon. I have him highlighted. Michigan running back playing Rutgers. I don't necessarily think Higdon was a bust last week. I think Higdon's probably the best thing that Michigan has going on offense this year. And Rutgers' defense is respectable. It's not bad, guys. So I don't think Higdon blows it out of the water. You won't see a 200-yard week like you did a couple of weeks ago. But I think Higdon, much like Adrian Killins, running back 2, 3, flex position, full FBS, Power 5, you've got to get him in your lineup. Full FBS, I think Aaron Duckworth at number 39 is a sleeper play in UL Monroe who gives up a ton of points. I'm expecting a lot of points in that game, but remember, I was expecting a lot of points in Idaho UL Lafayette when UL Lafayette was given like 189 points a game. That didn't happen. I think it does this week. I think this is the game where Idaho scores a lot of points playing that UL Monroe defense at Idaho. Number 43, Duke Catalan. Some of you guys may be a little curious of why Duke's not a little higher because of Dylan Burden's injury. Catalan's probably going to be the number one guy and get most and a majority of the carries now instead of splitting snaps. But you have to remember, they're still playing on the road this week, and they're playing against a solid South Florida defense. That's the reason why Catalan is not a top 30 pick this week. To me, he's a fringe flex play in some of your lineups, depending on the depth you have at the running back spot. Tyler King, I touched on him a few weeks ago, especially if you had the exclusive email, if you had access to the extended rankings. He was one of those guys that I threw up on my sleeper list about 3-4 weeks ago. He was, he was kind of showing his head here or there. Last week he had a really big week, and he's number 46 playing a good matchup against FIU this week. Marcus Williams, Appalachian State running back, in there at number 50. And I'll tell you, Marcus Williams would be higher in the rankings if we had a little bit more clarity on Jalen Moore heading into this weekend's matchup at Massachusetts, or he would be completely out of the rankings if we had a little bit more information on Jalen Moore. We have to monitor Jalen Moore, but the less information we get leading up to kickoff, the more confident that I think Marcus Williams will get the start at running back for Appalachian State, playing on the road this week at Massachusetts. Another sleeper running back in your full FBS modes, Josh Hokett, the running back, Fresno State, playing against UNLV. If you haven't and you're not familiar with the Fresno State story, go look at the stats. Go look at Josh Hokett. He's a scoring machine right now, and I think Fresno State has a great matchup this week against a bad UNLV defense, and I like for Fresno State to win that game, control the game on the ground, and I think Josh Hokett is a solid play this week for Fresno State against UNLV. I mentioned Xavier Jones and Kamon Freeman earlier when I was touching on Ben Hicks, the running backs from SMU. Great matchup on paper at Tulsa. Let's see if they give those guys the ball enough, or they put it in Ben Hicks' hands and goes up top to Trey Quinn and Cortland Sutton. But I think SMU could be solid all around on offense this week at Tulsa. I think if you're an SMU owner and have the owners of some of those players, the one thing that you're really pulling for more than anything is for Tulsa to score some points this week, because you want SMU to continue to score. And so you're pulling for the Tulsa offense in that SMU-Tulsa matchup. Number 61, Rodney Anderson, Oklahoma versus Texas Tech. You might be wondering why Rodney Anderson is number 60. If you followed along the shows all season long, there's one thing that I hardly buy into, and I'm not going to buy into and go full hook, line, and sinker on a one-week player, particularly at Oklahoma. Oklahoma this year, if there's two things that have been steady about Baker Mayfield, two players that have been steady, it's been Baker Mayfield at quarterback, and it's been Mark Andrews at the tight end if you've got him listed at the tight end spot. When it comes to running back and when it comes to receivers, guys, Oklahoma's like playing roulette, right? We get Abdul Adams good for a couple of weeks, Trey Sermon, then all of a sudden it's Rodney Anderson. Same thing at the wide receiver position. CeeDee Lamb, big game. All of a sudden Jeff Badgett next game with the big catch. All of a sudden now it's Marquise Brown. I mean, look, I don't know what to expect from the Oklahoma offense other than that. Baker Mayfield is going to be solid for you at quarterback, and Andrews is going to be a solid tight end play. Is Rodney Anderson the best option at running back heading into this week? Yes, because Oklahoma usually rides the hot hand, but that does not guarantee that Rodney Anderson is going to do what he did last week. If he doesn't pull off that one run at the end of the game, Rodney Anderson probably doesn't even get looked at on the waiver wire this week. So keep that in mind, guys. Sometimes you really have to take these at face value and read into it more than just reading the numbers. So Rodney Anderson at number 61. And while I am on that subject, Darren Hall, running back Pitt, playing at home against Virginia, right? And Virginia just got beat pretty darn good by Boston College. Pitt hasn't been good this year that much at all. So for Hall to run for another 200 yards, guys, come on. I don't see it happening. This is one that I was really concerned with, and I sent it out on the exclusive email. I don't think a lot of Pitt's matchups are overwhelming. But guys, if Pitt is Pitt, I don't see where Hall comes close to those numbers that he posted. I'm really concerned on whether or not Hall was a one-week wonder. And if I had to put my money on it right now, my answer would be yes, more times than no. Number 68, Keymon Freeman, SMU. I touched on him. Number 69, Emmanuel Reed. I mentioned some players were lower in the rankings than where what I thought. Emmanuel Reed came up one of those players playing at Akron. Akron last week got run on pretty good by Toledo. Buffalo is not Toledo. Buffalo struggled tremendously at the quarterback spot, but Reed is a high-volume guy. And sometimes with high-volume guys, he only needs one touch, and all of a sudden that puts him over 100 yards and he finds the end zone. I think Reed has the potential to have a better week than his number 69 ranking. Number 75, Morgan Ellison, running back, Indiana. I actually like him this week at Maryland. I think he could outperform his weekly 75 ranking. And Trey King, we have in there, the running back of Texas Tech, playing at Oklahoma. If Justin Stockton is unable to go, I think you've got to bump Trey King up more into the rankings, just like with Marcus Williams if Jalen Moore is unable to go. And number 86, Ish Witter. A lot of emails coming in, asking me about Ish Witter for Missouri. Go back and check the box score last week with that Missouri matchup. Ish Witter's not going to get all the carries, guys. You still have Larry Roundtree in there to worry about. And Missouri's so effective and efficient throwing the ball right now that I just don't know if Ish Witter, matter of fact, I don't think he's a slam dunk this week. And I do think, at best, he's a flex option for you guys. Now, let me run down the list because this is really extensive. Of players we did not rank based on injury. Bryce Love, right? We have limited time to see if he's going to play. D'Angelo Brewer, Tulsa, burned a lot of fantasy owners last week. Let's see if he gets the call this week. That needs to be monitored. Travis Etienne, running back, Clemson, playing Georgia Tech, questionable. Justin Stockton, Texas Tech. Jordan Wilkins, running back, Ole Miss, with a decent matchup against Arkansas when they need him now without Shea Patterson. He's questionable. I mentioned Jalen Moore. Nick Wilson, you may as well just back up an ambulance to Arizona, guys. Nick Wilson's going to be in there 2 or 3 times a year. And here we go. Right when Nick Wilson started doing well, and I know a lot of you guys are out there laughing because it's true, right? Nick Wilson, right when we thought he was, okay, Tate's quarterback, got some more holes opening up. Nick Wilson, questionable this week, heading into a matchup at home against Washington State. And then John Kelly today just added on to the questionable list. I think, as a matter of fact, before I came on, John Kelly was officially ruled out. And I think you can move on from John Kelly. And I do have a question coming up in the emails about Ty Chandler. So I'll tell you where I would fit him into the rankings as we get into the Q&A. With that being said, guys, I told you the quarterbacks, running backs, there was a lot to get to. The wide receivers, I'm not going to spend as much time. We're going to get into the start bench. We're going to address some of those questions for you all. And once again, thanks for coming in, guys. Glad to have you all again. Please stay with us. I know I mentioned this last week, and I haven't mentioned this on the show this week. For all we're going to do to provide fantasy content throughout the bowl season, I'm looking at doing these shows in groups at a time to cover X amount of bowl games. And whether that helps you with your DFS content, whether that helps you from a confidence pool standpoint, or whether that just helps you from a pure gambling standpoint. But you guys have asked for it, and I'm going to give that to you. We're going to do that and figure it out. I'll keep you guys posted in the coming weeks. But here we go. Week 9 wide receiver rankings. And I'm telling you, the one thing that I was really proud of that we did, and I mentioned a lot of our shortcomings. I said we never shy away from where we miss. But I do acknowledge sometimes where we hit them right. And David Sills was our #1 receiver for West Virginia heading into the season. Did I think Sills would be a top 5 receiver? No. But we were right when we predicted that Sills would be Greer's top target in 2017. And he's in there at #2. Jaleel Scott seems to be healthy. I think you have to put him at a top 5 position now this week, heading into a matchup at home against Arkansas State. I'm looking for a lot of points in that game, and you have to like the Jaleel Scott, Tyler Rogers combination heading into this week. Trey Quinn in there at #5 and Cortland Sutton in there at #8. We're finally getting productive weeks from both of the SMU receivers. That offense is looking like it's clicking, guys. Like I said, the only thing to be concerned about this week, if you're an owner of Trey Quinn or you're an owner of Cortland Sutton, is that on paper, they're going against one of the worst rush defenses in the FBS. So let's see if that affects the SMU game plan going into a really great Week 9 matchup at Tulsa. And like I said when I was doing the running back positions, you're really rooting for Tulsa to score points this week. Number 9, Jamon Moore, Missouri. And while I'm on Jamon Moore, Missouri, I'm going to mention Emmanuel Hall down there at 37. I think Moore's going to get most of the targets, but Hall now I think has hauled in at least a touchdown pass in 3-4 straight games for Missouri. And with that matchup this week at Connecticut, you have to like Jamon Moore and you have to like Emmanuel Hall at Missouri. And while I mentioned the Missouri receivers, I don't ever really touch on the tight end, but you have to like the Missouri tight end. And guys, forgive me if I butcher his name, Albert Okwuegbunam or whatever it is. 3 touchdowns last week. I think if you have him, you've got to play him this week in any Power 5 or FBS league, given the matchup this week. Getting back to receivers, Greg Dortch, the receiver, Wake Forest. Great matchup against Louisville. I mentioned at the top of the show that I really like the Wake Forest offense this week against the Louisville defense, and that's good news if you have Greg Dortch, who has just been a PPR machine this year. I think he finds the end zone this week. I think he gives you 100 yards this week, and don't be surprised if he eclipses 10 receptions this week. I'm looking for a 10-101 stat line from Greg Dortch at least this week at home against Louisville. A.J. Brown, number 13, and some of you guys may be surprised that A.J. Brown is so high with the loss of Shea Patterson. I have to tell you, I like the matchup this week. Ole Miss is at home, and I like Tamu. I think he's going to be good filling in for Shea Patterson, and I really like the schedule. If you're just tuning in now, I really like the Ole Miss schedule, and I think Tamu is going to be a good fantasy player. Not great. He's going to be a good fantasy option for you moving forward through the end of the year. I think number 20, Darren Carrington, right? Utah wide receiver. I think here's the thing to watch in this game. He's going back to Oregon. That's all you need to know. Utah wide receiver, Darren Carrington, going back to Oregon this week. They get a Ducks team that's been struggling. Utah is looking to put things together. You can bet Darren Carrington is going to be licking his chops against that Oregon secondary, and he's going to be asking for the ball. I wouldn't be surprised if he finishes the week as a top 10 receiver, but like I said, I try not to let those type of emotional things factor into the rankings, but Darren Carrington is probably a wide receiver to play this week on the road at Oregon. And Hergy Mayala, the wide receiver for Connecticut, right? He was hurt midway through the year, missed a few games. I think he's a really good play this week against a Missouri defense that's not that good. And here's the situation, like Tulsa and SMU. I think if you have Missouri players, you have the Drew Locks and you have Jamon Moore, what you're looking for is what you didn't get last week. Now, you were really fortunate. Idaho really didn't score any points. Man, can you imagine what Missouri can do from a fantasy standpoint if you have Locke, if you have Moore, if you have Hall this week, if somehow Connecticut finds a way to put up 20, 30 points on the board? I think it's possible. I don't think it's impossible, but remember, we're also talking about, and while we're getting on the topic of where do you have Brian Sheriffs and those type of players, remember, Sheriffs was a sweet pick a few weeks ago when they were playing Memphis. And that Connecticut offense did absolutely zero in the second half. If they did zero in the second half against Memphis, they might not fare well against, they may not fare any better than Idaho did against Missouri's defense this week. But you're pulling for Connecticut to score points if you have Missouri players. Ahmmon Richards, number 33, Miami playing at North Carolina. And I mentioned how much I like that Miami offense this week. I'll tell you guys, I saw that the Miami game last week against Syracuse because remember, here's the thing, and you could fire back at me for this. A lot of you guys will tell you, how can you bench Eric Dungey? I've doubted Eric Dungey one too many times. I couldn't doubt him anymore, and I sent this out on email. The 1 week that I don't doubt Eric Dungey, he goes ahead, and I think he 0 touchdowns, maybe 4 interceptions. But it happens. And, the playing conditions weren't great. The field was wet. But Ahmmon Richards, you could tell that he was rusty. He dropped about 4 or 5 passes last week. If he holds on to those 4 or 5 passes, Ahmmon Richards might have caught 200 yards. He might have had 200 yards receiving. He just improves a little bit. He's going to have a huge week this week. I like him on the road against North Carolina. I like that combination of Malik Rozier and Ahmmon Richards. He really targeted Richards often last week. I touched on Emmanuel Hall. 2 players that I have right next to one another. Stanley Morgan, 39, Darren Andrews, 40. These guys are probably 10 to 15 spots lower than they would have been 2 to 3 weeks ago, but I do think you have concerns if you have Nebraska players going against a Purdue defense that's actually been really good. Purdue's defense, and here's a shock, Purdue's defense has actually been better than the offense. And when Brom was coming in, the talk was watch this Purdue offense. It's going to be different. The story has been Purdue's defense and the lack of offense. So I think that's a concern if you have a Nebraska player. And then if you have a UCLA player playing on the road at Washington coming off of a loss, coming off of a bye, and I happen to think Chris Peterson's one of the best coaches in the FBS, and I think he'll have them ready against a struggling UCLA offense. Jon'Vea Johnson, wide receiver Toledo at number 47, playing at Ball State. Jon'Vea Johnson reemerged last week and seems like, hopefully, we get the Jon'Vea Johnson of 2016 now, and if so, with Cody Thompson being out, Jon'Vea Johnson and Deontay Johnson become a nice combination at wide receiver for that Toledo offense. Conaway Noah, the wide receiver Cal. I picked him up in a league last week, and I start him. Guys, if you Power 5 guys are probably already on Noah. If not, and he's on your waiver wire in a full FBS league, particularly in a PPR league, go look at the consistent numbers he has put in on week to week. And you know why he's on the waiver wire if he's there? Because he hasn't had this 200-yard, 150-yard, 3-touchdown game. The guy's just a consistent 7-catch, 80 to 90 yards, occasional touchdown every week. If you're playing in a league that you need 15, 17, 18 from your third wide receiver flex spot, Noah's a solid option. Go give him a look, give him consideration. Paris Campbell, number 56, wide receiver, playing home against Penn State. I have to tell you, everyone looking forward to this matchup. I like Ohio State in this matchup. Paris Campbell, Jekyll and Hyde this year, right? Up, down, up, down, up, down. Which one do we get this week? We just don't know. And that's why Paris Campbell is in the top 60, but he's not inside the top 50 because we just don't know which Campbell we're going to get this week. A lot of emails, or a couple of emails, coming in on TJ Rahming, the wide receiver of Duke. Hey, is this consistency something that's going to stick for him? First of all, here's my answer. I don't know, right? I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell. But what I can tell you is we just talked about Jekyll and Hyde, Paris Campbell. TJ Rahming has kind of been a little up and down himself. Half of the games this year, I think 3 games this year, he's had 6 or more receptions, and in 3 of the games this year, he's had 4 or fewer. So that's hit or miss to me. I'm a consistency guy. I like to stay away from hit or miss unless I'm in desperation mode. But TJ Rahming, for me, that's why he's not a top 50 receiver. You don't know which one that you're going to get. And then 2 guys that I think are sneaking up the radar, you have to give consideration in full FBS leagues. You probably have them in Power 5 leagues. But the receivers from TCU, Jalen Reagor and John Diarra, I think they're worth adding from a depth perspective. The one thing that we're really not seeing, and boy, you have to be disappointed if you're a Hicks owner or if you're an Anderson owner when Hicks was out, that running game now isn't producing as many points as they were at the beginning of the year, which I'm really surprised. But the receivers have a little bit of value, and the 2 that I like for TCU are Reagor and John Diarra. And so that is going to run through the running back rankings there, guys. So thanks for coming in again. I ran down what we will be doing over the course of the next few weeks for you guys, for you all that are just coming in. If you didn't catch that, go back to the beginning of the show when I wrap up. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the start bench, get into some Q&A, and we're going to call it a week. So here we go, guys. I'm going to start off as I traditionally do with the bench players. And you know what? This is a quarterback-heavy week. I have 1, 2, 3 quarterbacks on the start list. I've got 3 quarterbacks on the sit list. And I think I'm going to start with the one that's most obvious, and that's Zach Smith. Quarterback Baylor, playing home against Texas, and this is probably for a lot of these guys are Power 5 guys. So this is going to be a lot that applies to even Power 5 leagues as well. You have to remember that Zach Smith took over for Anu Solomon, right? And he threw 7 touchdown passes in his first 2 starts. Well, in the last 3 games, Zach Smith has only thrown for 1 TD. Last week, he was replaced by Charlie Brewer in that game against West Virginia. And that game, Brewer almost led the Bears to a huge comeback. They were a 2-point conversion away from tying a game. Now, remember this, too. That Texas defense has held Iowa State to 7 points. They did hold Oklahoma to fewer than 30. And then just last week, they held Oklahoma State to 13. So I think the combination of that quarterback position maybe being a little fluid and the Texas defense makes Zach Smith, quarterback Baylor, a Week 9 bench, even at home. Traquan Marshall, Georgia Tech quarterback, playing at Clemson this week, and I have to tell you this is a really iffy play. If a Power 5 league, you may have to consider it a little bit more based on your depth, but in a full FBS format, I think Marshall is a bench, even though he has rushed for over 100 yards in 4 of 6 games and 3 times so far in conference play. This week in Week 9, they play at Clemson. Remember, Clemson, a lot like Washington, coming off of a loss, coming off of a bye. And why is that bye big? Because now it gave Venables 2 weeks to prepare for the Georgia Tech option offense. I think that's really big, going against a Clemson defense that has 2 weeks to prepare. They're only allowing 13.6 points per game, which is 7th best in the FBS. They're only allowing slightly over 100 yards a game, 107 rushing yards per game. And I think that combination of Clemson coming off of a bye, coming off of a loss, 2 weeks to prepare for the triple option offense, and that defense has been solid, makes Traquan Marshall, quarterback Georgia Tech, a Week 9 bench at Clemson. A couple of running backs I'm going to mention here, and they're on the same team, guys. Florida running backs, Lamichael Pirine and Malik Davis. Now, here's what's interesting, right? Lamichael Pirine's been the TD machine on that. He's got 6 touchdowns in the last 3 games, and when you look at Malik Davis's numbers, he's gone over 90 yards rushing in 5 consecutive games. And it's like I said, I like playing guys that have momentum. I like the trends. I like guys that kind of give you that consistency. But they're playing Georgia this week, and that defense has only given up 82 rushing yards per game. That's 4th best in the country. They're only giving up, so that doesn't fare well for Malik Davis. They're only giving up 12.5 points per game on the scoreboard. So from a touchdown standpoint, that doesn't fare well for Pirine. Those 2 stats alone make both of those players, to me, a Week 9 bench, even though they're home against the Bulldogs. And the 4th player on the bench list, quarterback Josh Rosen, UCLA, playing at Washington. And I hinted to this when I was going over the quarterback rankings. You know, in the first 4 games of the season, the first 4 games of 2017, Josh Rosen accounted for 17 touchdowns. And I remember one week he was really too low. He went off of 5 touchdowns. And I remember seeing a comment, the CFF site has Rosen too low on the list. And whoever made that comment was absolutely right. But this was the Rosen that I was really anticipating this year. I think those beginning of the season games was more an enigma than what we're seeing right now. The last 3 games from Josh Rosen, he's only accounted for a total of 3 touchdowns. Rosen has only accounted for 3 touchdowns over the last 3 games. And look who they've played. Colorado, Arizona, and Oregon. Guys, that wasn't Murderer's Row. What's going on? Something is wrong with that UCLA offense, and guess what? They get no mercy this week against a Washington defense, right? That's only allowing 236 yards per game, total yards per game. That is 2nd best in the nation. They're only allowing 10.5 points per game. 3rd best in the nation, 163 passing yards per game. 6th best in the nation, and they've only given up 3 passing touchdowns this year. That's tied for 1st in the country. They're not a good formula if you have Josh Rosen this week. Put him on the bench Week 9 at Washington. That's my home run hit. I'm going to get into the starts this week, but I really wanted to focus on Josh Rosen in that bench piece. I touched on this player earlier when I was doing the quarterback rankings, so it's no surprise he's here, Malik Rozier, right? Rozier's accounted for 3 touchdowns or more in 4 of 6 games this year. He's gone over 250 yards passing in 5 consecutive games. He didn't in the first game of the year, but 5 consecutive games over 250 yards passing. And he has rushed for at least 40 yards. So he's given you a little bit in the running game. I mean, for some of you guys, 40 yards is a passing touchdown, 4 points. He's done that in half of his games this year, 3 of the 6 games. He's probably gone over, I think he's gone over 25 fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 games, and against a North Carolina defense that's given up over 34 points per game, which is last in the ACC. They're giving up 451 yards per game, once again last in the ACC. That UNC defense, pass defense, has been better than the run defense. I get that. But I still think this formula adds up for Malik Rozier to have a 25 to 30 point at least fantasy point game. And I think you've got to get him in your lineup in week 9 on the road at North Carolina. Let's see, who do I want to go to next? I'm going to go to Alex Delton, quarterback, Kansas State. I banged on him 2 weeks ago for his passing. He was efficient last week. You know, I crushed him for his passing accuracy. I've mentioned that now 3 times. He went 11 of 29 against TCU a couple of weeks ago. Well, guess what? He showed me last week, guys. He went 12 of 14 for 144 yards and a TD against Oklahoma last week. That more than made enough. That showed me more than what I needed to. Plus, he added another 140 and 3 touchdowns on the ground. Guess who they have this week, guys? Kansas. That Kansas defense is allowing 44 points per game. That's the second worst in the nation, and they're giving up 476 yards per game. That's among the 15 worst teams in the FBS. So between the potential of scoring and yardage, you've got to get Delton in your lineup this week, week 9 at Kansas. Another quarterback, and this is for your full FBS players. Mason Fine, quarterback, North Texas, playing Old Dominion. You know what? Mason Fine has passed for 3 TDs in 4 of 7 games this year. And in 3 of those 4 in which he did not, they were road games. So 3 of the 4 games he did not throw for 3 touchdowns or more. They were road games. Guess what? North Texas has a home matchup this week against Old Dominion. And that Old Dominion defense has given up over 34 points per game. They're giving up over 433 yards of offense per every week. I think that's a formula for get Mason Fine, and that passing game gets rekindled this week. And you know what? I didn't mention this in the receiver rankings, but Jalen Guyton, a lot of emails coming in about Jalen Guyton. Is he injured? What's going on? I actually did get in touch. I have spoken with someone over there at North Texas, and what they told me is that was addressed in the press conference, and that, in fact, Jalen Guyton did play. And Florida Atlantic flat out took him out of the game plan, didn't allow him to have 1 catch, and that's why you saw Lawrence blow up. For all of you guys concerned about Guyton, I can tell you the word is, he is A-OK. You just got that incredible bad luck last week, but he should be good to go this week, week 9. Matchup at home against Old Dominion. He should bounce back, and that's why he's high in the rankings. And here we go. Save this player for last. The player I was on a couple of weeks ago, going back and forth between his backfield mate, and now all of a sudden it's a one-man show. Cam Akers, running back, Florida State, this week. Okay? Cam Akers. Now here's some interesting stats to consider. This is some real oddities, and this is what led up to Akers being in the lineup. First of all, we're not used to Florida State being 2-4, 2-3 in conference play. We're not used to that, especially in the most recent history, right? We're not used to Boston College's offense scoring 40 points per game. They've done that in 2 consecutive games. That's an oddity. You want to know another oddity over the last couple of years? Boston College's defense has actually been really good. You know what they're giving up this year on the ground, guys? 224 yards per game on the ground. That's very un-Boston College-like from a Steve Adazio defense. They're giving up 27.5 points per game. All of these stats I just gave you are oddities for these teams going into this week. But what the formula adds up for me is I love high-volume guys. And Cam Akers was already getting a lot of touches. And now in the absence of Jacques Patrick, you have to figure Akers is in for 20, 25-plus carries this week against a Boston College run defense that has been struggling. Home run hit of the week. I'm making up for that Alexander Madison sort of single last week. And I'm going Cam Akers all in your lineup. Every lineup, full FBS, Power 5. Get him in week 9 playing against Boston College. And that's going to take care of the start bench, guys. And so now I'm going to get into some Q&A with some of you all, and I'm going to go ahead and touch, and I printed out some emails before the show just so I could reference them really quickly, but I'm going to go ahead and touch some of the ones that I have coming in. Guys, just since the show started, I'm sitting here, I've got 7 emails. If I don't get to them all, I'll try to get to you a little bit later, but one that I did mention when I was going over the running backs, where would I fit in Chandler this week now with the absence of John Kelly? And I tell you what I would do right now. You have to look, I would probably say, if I'm going running backs right now with Chandler, and you look at the confidence level of the guys that are in the rankings, I think once when you get to around the 30 mark, you've got to start figuring Chandler in with some of those guys. And if you're going to put Chandler somewhere in the 30s, I think that's considered a running back 2 spot in your Power 5 leagues, and in your full FBS leagues, I think you really do consider him at the flex spot, because who else do they have behind him? I think you roll the dice with Chandler this week, and he's a running back 2 or flex play in your full FBS league. So here's a couple of emails. I'll touch on these. Joe, we don't use tight ends in our league, but I do have Jaylen Samuels. Where would you rank him with the wide receivers? We use 3 wide receivers in our league, so I've got Washington, James Washington, David Sills, and I'm contemplating on whether I should put Jalen Smith in over Jaylen Samuels, given how well Notre Dame's defense is playing right now. What would you do? Class all along now, I mean, I've been saying this all along, guys. I'm not sitting Jaylen Samuels. He has been one of the best and productive wide receiver / tight end / H-backs in the nation this year. I don't care if they're playing Notre Dame. Look what they did against Florida State last week. I do know Neon Himes has taken his game to the next level when it comes to running back, and what a steal you guys got from a fantasy perspective if you have him. But Jaylen Samuels is a matchup nightmare, and you have to play him. A game against Notre Dame when North Carolina State more than likely is going to have to score some points. Next question. Half-point PPR, Power 5 league. This is an elimination for me, week for my team, and I'm torn at my flex position. He's got Baker Mayfield, Jonathan Taylor, Myles Gaskin, David Sills, and Dante Pettis. And I don't know how that's elimination week with that lineup. And at his flex position, he wants Justice Hill or Cam Phillips. The rankings indicate start Justice Hill. However, the team I'm facing is really, really good with Lamar Jackson and a bunch of other good players. I'm wondering if changes, if any, does Cam Phillips have more high potential than Justice Hill? No, I'm going Justice Hill. High volume guy in a game that can produce a lot of points. You have to start Justice Hill in that matchup. And here's the other one I have on paper, guys, and I think I touched on this on the rankings. Just curious, why is McKenzie Milton rated so far behind Brandon Wimbush, who's on my waiver wire? And is it Milton's play, his possible injury, or his opponent? And I have to tell you, it's not his play. It's his possible injury and his opponent. And it's the marriage of those 2 factors for me that keeps Milton a little bit lower on the list. Because if Central Florida races out to a big lead over Austin Peay, what do they have to gain by playing him? And if he does, why not just hand the ball off, hand the ball left, hand the ball right, give it to Killins, I see there's too much risk and too much on the line for them to stretch Milton. Now, he may be completely fine, but remember what I said. There's always risk involved with some of these. And in a game that doesn't have a lot of meaning, other than the fact that they need to win by about 4 touchdowns, and they have a solid defense, I don't necessarily see in McKenzie Milton needing to have a top 20 week this week. So that takes care of that. I addressed the Tyson Chandler issue. And guys, I have so many emails coming in. I'm trying to get to the ones that are short-winded. And hypothetically, if Moore is out, what would Williams be ranked ballpark given the UMass defense? Jonathan, I did address that in the rankings. Williams is in there. Maybe you don't have the extended rankings, and hopefully you watch the show, because I think he's just outside of the top 50. Let me check the chat here, guys, and I'll try to run down some of what you guys hear. A couple of start questions. Shimanek, and this comes from Dominic. Couple of start questions. Shimanek or Delton, and need to start 3. Dante Pettis, A.J. Brown, DJ Moore, and Cam Phillips. Wow, that is really tough right there. It's hard to sit Dante Pettis for me because of that matchup against UCLA and his potential to give you points and scores in the return game. DJ Moore was my first half MVP at the receiver position, considering where we had him ranked in the preseason. And Cam Phillips, A.J. Brown, for me, that's what your decision's actually coming down to. And I have to tell you right now, I think if you play in a PPR league, you're going Cam Phillips. But I would not be afraid of A.J. Brown if you own him, getting him in your lineup. I think just for the simple fact that A.J. Brown has a new quarterback this week, he's a little bit riskier than Phillips. So Dominic, I go Pettis, Moore, and Cam Phillips. Jeffrey, even with Guyton getting 0, I still won. Should I play Guyton or Ronald Jones in my flex spot? I just touched on that. I think given the way USC is struggling right now, Guyton is a very attractive option over Jones. However, I have to tell you, I think Jones is going to bounce back, but right now they're playing an Arizona State defense that's playing really well right now. Just won 2 really good games in a row. I'd really consider playing Jalen Guyton, but what it comes down to for me is it PPR. If it's PPR, I'm going Guyton. If it's non-PPR, I'm starting Jones and hope that he finds the end zone a couple of times. If Jordan Wilkins plays, where does he rank? Is his injury the same one that he came back from in the second half of the LSU game? Or should I play Higdon or Laird, who are both on waivers? I'm going Higdon or Laird in both of those guys. If I'm considering that matchup, guys, that's where I would go. If you were to put Adam Brenneman, let's see. If you were to put Adam Brenneman in the wide receiver rankings, where would he be? I think when you consider Brenneman into the wide receiver rankings, I think you've got to consider him probably a wide receiver too. I think you've got to put a guy like Adam Brenneman in the top 25 to 30 receivers, guys. That's just my honest opinion. He's given you wide receiver numbers at the tight end position, and for that reason, you work him in there. And I may have a few more coming in, guys. I may be having some problem with the chat room, but I think I might have got them all right there. So here we go, guys. That's a wrap for this week. We're going. This is our longest show. I say that every week. I could sit here and take questions all night or talk about all these players one by one and go through the list and do it for 4 hours. But I'm going to go ahead and get off, guys. Look, it's been a really good week, jam-packed. If you're just coming in, buddy of mine, Zeke, congratulations. I'm in his wedding this week. We got a wedding going on, CFF site family wedding. So I'll be at that. That's why we're doing the show on Wednesday compared to Thursday. It's been a really good week. We've been jam-packed. A lot of errors. We hopefully got those addressed. Still plan on putting up the injury report tomorrow. But look, for a lot of you guys, it's do or die time. It's time to make a move. Send in the emails. Let's get those start benches addressed. Let's get the lineup set. Let's get the roster set. Let's get you on the streak heading into the postseason. And a lot of you guys shooting for the #1 seed. Good luck to you. Look, good luck to everyone this week, guys. It's been a jam-packed week. Once again, for the CFF site, I am the voice of the CFF site, Joe DeSalvo, tuning off this week. But come in next week. We'll be back on our regular Thursday nights. Good luck this week, guys, and I'll talk to you all next week.